May the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, my strength and my Redeemer. Amen. In November of 2012, the Cornerstone Bank in Waco, Nebraska, was robbed of $6,000. And the bank employees tried to help the police out, trying to give a description of the young lady who had done the work and also a description of the car that was her getaway vehicle. But it turns out the investigators didn't actually need that help, for the perpetrator of the crime had recorded a YouTube video titled Chick Bank Robber, boasting of her criminal prowess. In fact, in front of the camera, she showed all the money that she had taken from the bank and held up a sign that read, "I just stole a car and robbed a bank. Now I'm rich, I can pay off my college financial aid, and tomorrow I'm going for a shopping spree." I'm sure that you know of other situations, people that have chosen to speak proudly about what they've accomplished and perhaps wasn't the best of the ideas that they had. We know sometimes that the words that come from our mouths reveal the condition of our hearts and our minds, and we ask God to always be in our hearts. I'm not sure what the motivation for this girl was. Did she tell the story because she had a lot of pride, or was she just really happy that she had a lot of money? I don't know. Either way, it was a mistake for her to talk when she should have been quiet. It was a mistake for her to think that she was in control of all things in this world. She might have not been a God-fearing person, or perhaps she was, but it would have helped if she had put more of her trust in God, I would say. I just want to tell one other quick story. When Muhammad Ali was the heavyweight boxing champion of the world, he was on a flight, and it was the plane was starting to head down towards the runway, and the flight attendant walked by and noticed that he didn't have his seatbelt on. And so she said to him, "Please fasten your seatbelt, sir." And he said, "Superman don't need a seatbelt." But she didn't hesitate, and she responded, "Superman don't need a plane." You know, Muhammad Ali was such a great self-promoter. He often called himself the greatest. We know that. And I'm sure he had a lot of pride in his gifts, and he knew, just as we know, that our gifts come from God, and we should humbly thank God for all that we've been given. And I don't think we should be too hard on Muhammad Ali, for he did many, many good things in this world. This is actually the third week in a row that our gospel stories speak to us about the importance of prayer. Perhaps you remember that 2 weeks ago, there were 10 lepers that were healed by Jesus. One of them, a Samaritan, came back and gave thanks to God for that particular gift. The importance of thanksgiving prayer. Then last week, we heard the story of the widow who went back again and again to the judge, asking for justice. And the judge granted her that, perhaps just because she was so obstinate. An example, and Jesus used that prayer to tell us and his followers that we're supposed to be unceasing in our prayers because God will listen and God will respond. And this week, we have another example of prayer. I think we're being told to pray humbly before God, to ask for forgiveness, and to ask God to give us strength. So it's an example of that is found in the gospel for today, and a parable about the tax collector and the Pharisee. And the Pharisee seemed to have pride in his own accomplishments, and the tax collector was humble in his failings. And in that, both of them turned to God in prayer. The Pharisee thanked God that he wasn't like other people. You know, that Pharisee did a lot of good things in his life. His problem wasn't what he did, problem was how he prayed. He judged the tax collector and others like him. His fault was in believing that he was personally responsible for all that he had done, and he didn't give credit to God for all that he had been given. But the tax collector, on the other hand, the tax collector didn't take any credit for anything he had done. He simply turned to God and asked for God's forgiveness and mercy. As we look at this particular passage, it seems that the tax collector was doing the right thing and the Pharisee was wrong. And that's certainly true in their prayer. But I'd ask us not to judge the Pharisee too harshly or too quickly. For I think sometimes I'm like that Pharisee. I think many of us are. We try to be law-abiding. We try to be faithful people. We come to church. We try to follow the commandments, and we give what we can. Nor should we glorify the tax collector, for tax collectors were often quite immoral. They tricked people, causing them to pay too much in their taxes, and they tricked the people they were supposed to give the money to, sometimes keeping more than they were supposed to. I doubt that this tax collector was such a good person. And so when we look at this story, I'd ask you to not think about the Pharisee as a villain or the tax collector as a hero. You know, as I said, we might be like that Pharisee in some ways. We probably don't say the words that he said specifically today. We don't say, thank you, God, that I'm not like that sinner over there. Probably don't say those words. But there are other times, I think, when we think about ourselves as better than others, or perhaps doing well. Have you ever said the words, when you think about someone who's down on their luck, thank there, but for the grace of God go I. Don't we sometimes have some words that we say that suggest that we think we might be just a little better than someone else? Instead, I would suggest that our prayers for today, our words for today, encourage us to focus on God, because God is the one who accepts us as we are. God is merciful to us. God has given us everything that we have, especially the gifts that help us to be good people. God deals equally with the saint and the sinner. So as I said, I think today's lesson is that we're to be humble in our prayers to God, asking forgiveness and asking God to give us strength. And as part of that, I think we also praise and thank God for all that God has done for us. And it's probably important, too, that we have to be careful, because it's pretty easy to fall into a trap where we might give the appearance that we're humble when actually we're kind of proud of what we've accomplished. Being humble is not always easy to do. Now, in the lesson for today, it says that the tax collector was justified by God. Justification is the process by which we are brought into an unmerited right relationship with God. And that's what happened with the tax collector. The tax collector didn't do anything. But in his prayers, he asked God for forgiveness, and God justified him and brought him into a right relationship. And so just as with the tax collector, we're not justified by what we have done, but we're justified by God's grace. And so today, as we offer these prayers humbly and think about the praise and thanksgiving, then we can kind of connect with the other lessons that we have for today. In the reading from 2 Timothy, Paul was preparing for his own death and kind of reflecting on his life, thinking about how he had suffered to share God's great news with all the people that he encountered, and thinking about people who had tried to harm him along the way. But he was so humble and thanked God for caring for him as he tried to share that good news. And Paul also looked forward to a time when he would be going to heaven to join with Jesus. Another gift that God gives us, a reason to be humble. I like the reading that we have today from the book of Joel as well. It's a call for us to rejoice in the Lord. If you paid a lot of attention to that story, you notice that there had been a big plague of locusts for several years destroying the crops in Israel. But now it was going to be different. For God is going to provide rain at exactly the right time to make the most out of those crops. Perhaps something we should pray for here in Arizona, by the way. And God was going to provide. And what Joel said is that the crops were going to be plentiful and that there was going to be plenty of wine for everyone to drink. God will provide. Now, my favorite line from that particular story is the line that goes, I will pour out my Spirit upon all flesh. God promising that God was going to send the Spirit to be with us. And I'd ask you just for a minute to think about how it feels when the Spirit is poured out on you. As we did our Bible study on Wednesday, several people tried to describe how they felt when they knew that God's Spirit was with them. Someone mentioned the idea that it gave them a sense of calm in their life. Another person said it gave them energy to do what they needed to do. And a third person kind of imagined the physical sense that we would have if we could feel God's healing oils coming to be with us, giving us refreshment, giving us healing. I think today's lesson is about calling us to be humble. And it's pretty difficult, I think, to always be humble on our own. In fact, some of us, myself included, are happy, especially in the sense that we're feeling that we're with God and following God's will. And yet, if we listen to what happened to the Pharisee, we might remember that we should be careful not to judge others into how they should be. And always remember that what we have is a gift that we've received from God. And perhaps one of the ways we can be humble is to always make a list of all the things that God has given us. Today I encourage you to, as you enter into your prayer life, to do so asking God to help you to be humble, asking God to forgive you for what you've done wrong, and asking God to give you the strength to carry on. Always giving credit to God. Amen.